Carl Jung, a pioneer in analytical psychology, once uncovered a profound truth about empaths. A truth so deeply buried that many live entire lives without realizing it. He found that empaths remain in a cycle of pain until they let go of one particular emotional attachment. This isn't just any attachment, it's one that feels synonymous with their very sense of self. Letting it go isn't just difficult. It feels like erasing who they are. If you're someone who's tried every healing method in the book, setting boundaries, energy cleansing, therapy, self-care rituals, and still find yourself constantly weighed down by others' emotions, then it's not the techniques that have failed you. It's that one hidden wound you haven't touched. Jung referred to it as the core empath wound, the underlying emotional program that sabotages all other healing efforts. Empaths often internalize a subtle but devastating belief early on, that their worth is tied to how much pain they can absorb for others. This is the real wound, not the sensitivity itself. Sensitivity is a gift, a biological trait supported by neuroscience, mirror neurons. In fact, allow empaths to feel others' emotions as if they were their own. But it's the belief that this gift must be used to prove your value that turns the gift into a burden. Back in 1923, Jung worked with a patient we'll call Clara. Clara had spent her life absorbing others' suffering until her own emotions became a blur. Despite her efforts, cutting off toxic friends, meditating, and attending therapy, nothing relieved her chronic emotional exhaustion. She told Jung, "I can feel everyone's pain, my mother's sadness, my husband's stress, my children's anxiety, but I no longer know what I truly feel." What Jung saw was revelatory. Clara wasn't truly trying to stop absorbing pain. She was trying to keep absorbing it without feeling destroyed by it. All her healing efforts were merely methods to maintain the behavior that was slowly draining her life force. Jung's words cut through the fog. You cannot heal while holding on to the one thing that makes you feel significant. And there it was, the core. Empaths don't just feel deeply. They often build their very identity on the act of carrying others' suffering. They believe they are important only when they sacrifice. That belief, learned in early childhood, gets reinforced over and over until it becomes a blueprint for how they show up in every relationship. This isn't about weakness. It's about survival. As children, many empaths found that when they felt a parent's pain and helped alleviate it, they received love or praise. When they soothed a sibling's distress, they became the family's emotional anchor. Over time, helping became their ticket to feeling seen. Jung explained that Clara's sensitivity wasn't her problem. It was the emotional equation she unconsciously internalized. I matter only when I'm helping others carry their pain. This equation becomes so intertwined with an empath's identity that separating from it feels like emotional suicide. But unless it's released, no healing method will truly work. The person may change their environment, cut people off, or take breaks, but the internal compulsion remains. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Research into mirror neurons by Dr. Joachim Bauer shows that empaths have intensified neural pathways that make them highly attuned to others' emotions. They can literally feel what another is experiencing. But this trait alone doesn't doom someone to codependency or burnout. The real danger lies in what they believe about that sensitivity. For those like Clara, the belief becomes, if I stop helping, I stop mattering. In Jung's words, the problem isn't feeling too much, it's believing your feelings only matter when they're in service of someone else. The gift isn't cursed, the attachment isn't. The true danger is this: when your sense of identity depends on sacrifice, peace feels like invisibility. You begin to chase crisis not because you love it, but because you don't know who you are without it. Jung identified 3 patterns that reveal the empath's core wound. The first is what he called the rescue addiction. Clara's life was consumed by constant emotional firefighting. A friend in marital distress, she'd spend hours coaching them. A parent confused about a decision, she'd jump in and do the research. A child struggling at school, she'd stay up late solving the problem. When Jung asked her when she did something purely for herself, Clara responded, "Helping them is for me, it makes me feel good." But Jung challenged, was it actually about joy or about feeling necessary? This distinction floored her. She had never questioned her motives. It wasn't just compassion, it was compulsion. Clara had constructed her identity around being needed. Her most intense relationships were with those in crisis. Even her career social work ensured she was surrounded by pain daily. Clara didn't just help, she needed to help. Without someone to save, she felt unanchored. Jung observed that many empaths unconsciously seek out relationships that require rescue. Their closest bonds are often with those who are the most emotionally unstable. Over time, their own well-being becomes irrelevant. The pain of others becomes the air they breathe. Helping isn't the addiction. Being needed is. Clara began to see how her compulsion to help wasn't just about kindness. It was control disguised as care. By always stepping in, she could ensure her place in the lives of others. Jung explained that for some empaths, crisis becomes a form of self-preservation. As long as there's someone to save, they feel essential. But when things calm down, when people become independent, the empath feels lost, almost irrelevant. This cycle isn't limited to Clara. History offers striking examples. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing, revolutionized healthcare during the Crimean War. Yet, in peacetime, her letters reveal an inability to adjust to normalcy. She became sickly, created interpersonal chaos, and emotionally manipulated those around her. Why? Because her identity had become bound to being needed in a crisis. She didn't know how to exist without it. This is the nature of rescue addiction. It trains empaths to feel most alive when depleted, most worthy when exhausted. Modern studies on codependency confirm this. Many helpers report the highest satisfaction when drained and the most anxiety when well rested. Without stress, they question their worth. Clara's own life echoed this research. She admitted to feeling restless when her friends were doing well. She secretly hoped her husband would ask for help, just so she could prove her love. She offered assistance before anyone asked, creating invisible contracts that ensured her usefulness. I thought I was being loving, she confessed, but I realize now I was orchestrating dependency. Jung helped Clara recognize the difference between true compassion and emotional enmeshment. One empowers the other person. The other makes them reliant on your sacrifice. Clara was beginning to see that her desire to rescue was less about others and more about keeping her own fears at bay. Then came the second pattern, the suffering identity. By their fourth session, Jung gave Clara a radical challenge. For 1 week, don't help anyone unless they ask 3 separate times. Clara's anxiety skyrocketed. But what if they need me and don't ask? She cried. Jung replied, then maybe they're more capable than you think. The first few days were agony. Clara's phone buzzed with friends venting about problems. She resisted the urge to respond with fixes. Her mother called, overwhelmed with indecision. Clara listened but didn't jump in. That night, she paced her home, nearly consumed by guilt and confusion. Without rescuing, she didn't know who she was. For years, Clara's very sense of self was tied to the pain she carried for others. Now, in silence, she met someone new herself. On day 5 of the experiment, something unexpected happened. Boredom. Clara sat in her living room, without crises to solve, without anyone to save. The stillness felt alien. For years, she had been running from one emotional fire to the next, believing it was compassion. But now, she realized this was her identity unraveling. Without pain to carry, she felt hollow. This is the hallmark of the suffering identity. It doesn't just mean feeling others' pain, it means becoming it. Clara wasn't simply helping people. She was building her sense of self out of their struggle. One of Jung's other patients once said, if I'm not worrying about someone, I don't know what to do with myself. Another said, my entire introduction is built on the suffering I manage. Without it, I'm invisible. Jung shared that Clara wasn't alone. Many empaths, consciously or not, create or cling to chaos in their lives just to have something to suffer through. Peace isn't just unfamiliar, it's threatening. Elizabeth, another patient, sabotaged healthy relationships and work opportunities because calmness felt like death. When life quieted, she stirred the pot, picked fights, made reckless choices just to feel alive again. Modern brain science supports this. Studies on trauma bonding reveal that prolonged exposure to stress rewires the brain to interpret chaos as comfort. The body becomes addicted to arousal, and calmness triggers anxiety. Empaths who've spent years managing others' pain often find stillness suffocating. The neural wiring screams, if I'm not helping, I'm not important. Clara experienced this directly. The longer she went without managing others' emotions, the more she questioned her purpose. She missed feeling drained, because being drained was proof she mattered. In a tearful session, she admitted, I don't know who I am if I'm not carrying someone else's burden. Jung leaned in and asked, maybe that's the question you've been avoiding your whole life. This was the gateway to the third and most insidious pattern, the worth equation. One afternoon, Clara spoke the unspoken, if I stop helping, they won't need me. And if they don't need me, why would they love me? That was it. The buried belief revealed. My worth equals my usefulness. My lovability equals my sacrifice. My value equals how much I give away. Clara traced this equation back to her childhood. At 7, her father left and her mother fell into depression. Clara became the emotional support. Her mother called her my rock. And for the first time, Clara felt seen. Each time she absorbed pain, she was praised. Each time she sacrificed, she was validated. And so, the formula formed. If I carry your suffering, I earn love. This worth equation became Clara's emotional compass. Whenever she was praised for selflessness, her brain reinforced the message. Pain equals purpose. Over the years, it was no longer just a belief. It became her truth. Like so many empaths, Clara grew up equating self-worth with self-sacrifice. Her value wasn't in who she was, but in what she could do for others, especially in moments of distress. Studies on parentified children, those who are forced to become caretakers at a young age, reveal a disturbing trend. These individuals often grow into adults who feel guilty resting, receiving, or asking for help. Their self-esteem becomes dependent on being the strong one. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion confirms that caregivers, particularly those who overextend themselves, consistently score lower on feelings of inherent worth. They believe they matter only when meeting someone else's needs. Clara was no exception. She had lived for decades with the unconscious conviction that her usefulness was her only form of currency. The idea of resting, receiving help, or setting a boundary triggered guilt. If I'm not needed, she confessed, then I'm nothing. Jung looked her in the eyes and said what no one had dared to tell her before. So, you've chosen a slow death by depletion over the risk of being unloved for who you really are. That statement shattered her. Empaths like Clara fear that boundaries make them unlovable, that rest is selfish, that peace means being forgotten. But none of these are truths. They're emotional distortions shaped by a lifetime of conditioning. Jung wasn't interested in merely challenging Clara's beliefs. He wanted to help her disprove them through lived experience. In their 8th session, he gave her a simple yet terrifying instruction. For the next month, you're going to stop proving your value through suffering. You're going to discover behaviorally that you still matter, even when you're not rescuing anyone. Clara pushed back. I've tried self-affirmations. They don't work. Jung nodded. That's because words aren't enough. You can't just tell yourself a new belief. You have to test it with action. He called it the worth test. Every time Clara felt the urge to rescue, she was to pause and ask herself, if I don't help right now, I am. The goal wasn't to fix the belief, but to reveal it. Her answers were chilling. A bad person, selfish, worthless, unlovable. Each time she completed that sentence, Clara gained clarity on how deeply rooted the equation was. These weren't fleeting thoughts. They were programmed reflexes, formed in childhood and strengthened through repetition. But now, for the first time, she was confronting them directly. Jung's second instruction was even harder. He told Clara to do the opposite of what the equation demanded. When she felt the impulse to rescue someone, she was to pause, let the urge rise, and then not act on it. Instead, she'd simply observe what happened. Would she really become irrelevant? Would her relationships crumble? Would she cease to exist in people's lives? Clara wasn't convinced, but she agreed. The first week was brutal. A close friend called in a panic about her failing marriage. Normally, Clara would have dropped everything to coach her through it. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "That sounds really tough. I trust you'll figure it out." Then, she hung up the phone. Her body was trembling. The guilt felt physical. Her mind screamed, "You're cold. She'll hate you. You failed her." But the next day, her friend sent a message. "Thanks for believing I could handle it. I actually worked it out." The rescue hadn't been necessary. Clara's worth hadn't evaporated. In week 2, her mother called with a minor health issue. Clara's old self would have spent hours researching every possible solution. But this time she said, "That does sound stressful. Let me know what your doctor says." Her mother was annoyed. Clara felt the guilt immediately, but resisted the urge to overfunction. 2 days later, her mother called back, surprised at her own independence. "I figured it out myself. I'm proud of that." Again, the rescue hadn't been needed. With each test, Clara experienced the dissonance between her internal equation and the external reality. Her brain told her she was worthless without sacrificing herself, but her life kept proving otherwise. Jung explained, each time you set a boundary and survive the guilt, you weaken the equation's power. Modern psychology supports this. Behavioral experiments, actually testing beliefs through experience, are far more effective at rewiring the brain than thinking alone. When Clara didn't rescue and still felt loved, still had connections, and still mattered, her brain started updating its predictive model. The old equation, worth equals suffering, no longer held up under scrutiny. She practiced this for 8 weeks. Each time, the guilt was still there, but so was the evidence. She existed beyond her usefulness. She could say no and still be respected. She could let others solve their problems and they wouldn't abandon her. Her importance didn't depend on depletion. Clara's daily life became a lab for transformation. Monday morning, she sat in silence for 30 minutes. Her mind panicked, "You're lazy. You should be helping someone." But she stayed. Eventually, a quiet thought emerged. "I'm not doing anything and I still exist." And that was enough. By the 3rd week, Clara was confronting not just actions, but identity. She began receiving help from others. Her friend offered to help move furniture. The old Clara would have refused. No, I've got it. I don't want to be a burden. But this time, she accepted. Yes, thank you. The guilt returned, strong as ever. She felt unworthy, indulgent, but underneath that guilt was something surprising. Relief. For the first time, she realized her needs could matter too. She didn't have to give constantly to deserve love. Saturday evening, Clara painted for 3 hours, not to process emotions, not to serve a purpose just because it made her happy. Before, she'd have dismissed that as self-indulgent, but now she recognized it as nourishment. These moments stacked up like bricks, forming a new foundation. Jung called it replacing the false self with a true one. The false self is the identity built on pain. I am the fixer, the caretaker, the sacrificer. The true self simply is a being, not a role. Through repetition, Clara learned that her worth didn't come from how much she gave away. Stillness wasn't laziness. It was presence. Enjoyment wasn't selfish. It was wholeness. Receiving wasn't weakness. It was balance. She stopped thinking in terms of transactions. It'll help you, so I feel needed. Instead, she began asking, do I want to help? Or do I need to feel important? Will this deplete me? Or is it from overflow? When the answer revealed emotional compulsion instead of genuine desire, Clara gave herself permission to say no. At first, saying no felt like betrayal. But with each boundary honored, the old identity crumbled a little more. She noticed that her help became more effective when it came from fullness, not from lack. Instead of trying to fix people, she offered support without attachment. Research confirms that sustainable caregiving leads to better outcomes for everyone involved, especially the caregiver. Over time, Clara's relationships evolved. She stopped offering help before being asked. She allowed others to take ownership of their lives. Her friends became more empowered, her family more self-reliant, and those who thrived on her over-functioning either adapted or drifted away. What remained were relationships based on mutual respect, not emotional contracts. Clara was no longer the woman who carried the world. She was someone who painted, who rested, who laughed, who loved without needing to prove anything. In one of her final sessions, she said to Jung, I feel like I'm finally meeting myself, the me who isn't exhausted. And Jung smiled. That was the beginning of real freedom. Clara's transformation wasn't a straight line. Some days, the old beliefs whispered louder than her new truth. On those days, she wanted to revert to overextend, to prove her worth again through sacrifice. But something had changed. Even when the urge came, she paused. She remembered the question, am I helping from overflow or from emptiness? She discovered that when she helped from fullness, the help felt clean, empowering rather than draining. She could sit with someone in pain and not take it on. She could witness struggle without rushing to fix it. Jung called this empathy without absorption, the ability to feel with others without losing yourself in the process. In one moment that captured her growth, her daughter struggled with a school project. The old Clara would have jumped in, solving it all. But instead, she asked, that sounds frustrating. What do you think you should try? Her daughter paused, then came up with a creative solution. Clara didn't just feel pride, she felt relief. Her help had no strings attached. Later that week, her husband seemed tense about work. Clara gently asked, do you want to talk about it? He said, not really. The old Clara would have pushed, dissected, offered strategies. The new Clara said, okay, and let it go. A few days later, he came to her, ready to talk on his terms. Her relationships shifted. With friends, she stopped filling silences with advice. She listened with presence, not pressure. I'm here for you, she'd say, but I trust you to find your own way. That simple trust deepened her connections. People began opening up, not because they needed saving, but because they felt respected. The most surprising challenge, though, was watching others grow without her. She saw her mother make decisions alone, her daughter take more initiative, her friends solving their own problems, and at first, it stung. Part of her still wanted to be the hero, but slowly, she realized stepping back was the most loving thing she could do. True support isn't about taking over, it's about believing others are capable. And the people who truly loved her, they stayed, not because she was useful, but because she was her, fully, freely, authentically herself. For the first time, Clara began crafting a self-concept beyond suffering. I am someone who creates, who enjoys, who rests, who is enough. 1 year into her journey, Clara said something that stunned even herself. I can still feel deeply, I can still care, I can still love, but I no longer need your pain to feel like I matter. That was the definition of real transformation. Clara no longer measured her importance by the weight she carried. Her empathy hadn't diminished, it had evolved. She could still feel the emotions of others, still sense subtle shifts in energy, but she no longer mistook their suffering as a call to sacrifice herself. She had learned to differentiate between being present and being responsible. Jung called this emotional maturity empathy with boundaries. Love without martyrdom. It's what many empaths never realize they're capable of. Clara hadn't lost her sensitivity. In fact, it had become sharper. But now, it was a tool, not a trap. She reflected on the old version of herself, the constant helper, the emotional sponge, the woman who couldn't sit still without feeling anxious. That woman believed she had to earn love by emptying herself. She now understood. Love that must be earned through depletion isn't love, it's dependency. Her energy shifted. The people who once relied on her to carry their pain noticed the change. Some pulled away, confused by her boundaries. Others rose to the occasion, growing into their own strength. And new relationships emerged. Ones built on mutuality, not one-sided sacrifice. For the first time, Clara had friends who asked what she needed, who offered help, who valued her joy as much as her support. It felt unfamiliar, but deeply nourishing. She began honoring her desires, exploring hobbies she had long abandoned, painting, reading, slow walks in nature, not because it made her productive, but because it made her feel alive. She stopped apologizing for needing space. She stopped feeling guilty for doing nothing. Stillness became sacred. Jung had warned her about the void, the period after releasing the false identity when everything feels uncertain. For Clara, that void had once felt unbearable. Now, it felt like home. The emptiness wasn't a loss. It was a clearing, space for truth to emerge. She didn't need to be the best daughter, the tireless mother, the dependable friend. She just needed to be real. Authenticity replaced performance. Her presence became her gift, not her exhaustion. And slowly, something magical happened. She realized she was loved even when she wasn't useful. She could exist without proving. She could receive without guilt. And most of all, she could love herself, not for what she gave, but for who she was. As Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And Clara, she was finally living that privilege one unhurried, unburdened day at a time. 6 months after her final session with Jung, Clara sat alone in a quiet cafe, journaling, not to track anyone else's emotions, not to prepare for the next crisis, just for herself. Her page was filled with reflections, not obligations. For the first time, her thoughts weren't consumed by someone else's chaos. She was fully present with herself. The most painful thing Clara had ever done wasn't leaving toxic relationships. It wasn't saying no. It wasn't even the guilt of letting others handle their own struggles. The most painful thing she did was releasing the belief that she only mattered when suffering. That belief had once been her compass. It had helped her survive. It had given her a role when she felt invisible. But it had also imprisoned her. And now, as she looked around at her life calmer, quieter, more balanced, she realized that belief was gone. She could still be compassionate without collapsing, supportive without solving, loving without losing herself. Her empathy had matured. It had shed the need to perform, to prove, to earn space in the world. She had rewritten the equation, her new truth. I am worthy. Even when I rest, I am lovable. Even when I say no, I am significant. Even when I'm not needed. And this truth didn't come from affirmations. It came from living over and over again the opposite of what she once believed. She had tested her worth, and each time, life had answered. You still exist. You're still loved. You still matter. Jung once told her, empathy isn't the problem. Attachment to significance through suffering is. That lesson had changed her life. Her gift was never the issue. The wound was in how she used it to fill a void. Now, that void had become space for creativity, for joy, for peace, and Clara knew she would never go back. If you, like Clara, have lived by the rule that your value is in your usefulness, it's time to challenge it, test it, set a boundary, say no, sit in stillness, ask for help, let someone else solve their own problem. And when the voice inside says you're unworthy, listen for the quieter truth beneath it. You are enough, just as you are. The most painful thing an empath must release isn't a person, it's not even a behavior. It's a belief that their pain is proof of their purpose. Once that belief is gone, something beautiful remains. Empathy without depletion, love without self-abandonment, presence without performance, worth simply because you exist. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to join others releasing the core empath wound and discovering worth beyond suffering. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.